Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this week's video. In light of the current situation, I've actually decided to write out what I want to talk about today, simply because I know that everyone's being overloaded with all the information that they're reading online, seeing in the news and so forth. So I want to make sure that I stay on topic, I keep it concise, I keep it relevant, and I'm also mindful of everyone's time because again, hearing about this, repeatedly, it can be draining emotionally, mentally, and physically. So without further ado, this week we're actually going to talk about traumatic loss. And as some of you may have already guessed, we are going to be discussing the recent loss of George Floyd. So if you see me looking away, it's because I'm reading from my laptop. Like I said, I want to keep it to the point. So in this week's video, I'm going to be discussing recent events pertaining to the murder of George Floyd and others that have similarly died as a result of police brutality. This is a sensitive topic for many, but one that has to continue being spoken about without fear. I'm going to speak about this case in relation to the actual death of George Floyd and the actions and events that have taken place directly after. Before we jump right in, let's first try to understand what kind of loss this is. A person doesn't have to be related or have known George Floyd to understand that his death is considered to be traumatic. A traumatic loss not just for his immediate family and friends, but a traumatic loss for the world. For a world that is sick and tired of seeing these kinds of scenarios replayed over and over again. The story of George Floyd is a story that we have seen one too many times. It is a story that as a people we continue to fight against, but yet for some reason still find ourselves in very similar narrative despite the progress we have made over the years. Progress in the eyes of who, might you ask? But before I get ahead of myself, let's first go back to what constitutes a loss as traumatic. In a previous video, I briefly summarized how a loss can be considered traumatic. According to Wortman and Latak, a death is considered traumatic if it occurs without warning, if it is untimely, if it involves violence, if there is damage to the loved one's body, if it was caused by a perpetrator with the intent to harm, if the survivor regards the death as preventable, if the survivor believes that the loved one suffered, or if the survivor regards the death or the manner of death as unfair and unjust. With this definition, we can say that George Floyd's death was without warning and untimely. It involved violence. One may even consider that the officers that murdered Floyd did have the intent to harm him, being that they ignored his pleas of not being able to breathe, and according to the video, even remained on his neck and refused to get him help once it was seen that he was no longer breathing. This death was 1,000% preventable. Unfortunately, one could also come to the conclusion that Floyd did in fact suffer before dying, being that his cause of death was asphyxiation and the manner of death was both unfair and unjust. It's incredible that Floyd's death was able to check off most of the boxes. So here we can better understand the type of loss that we will be discussing. And some of you may ask, what does it matter if it was traumatic or not? It matters because there seems to be an uproar and even some confusion over the reactions of people as a result to not just Floyd's death, but the thousands of African American individuals that continue to lose their lives violently, unjustly, unfairly, and with suffering. This video is not made with the intention to condemn people, but to shed light on this matter, to bring attention, understanding, and compassion. Let me ask you this. If what happened to Floyd actually happened to your brother, your father, your cousin, your uncle, your son, how would you feel? I want you to actually take a moment to reflect on that question. Think about it. You don't need to respond. How would I feel if someone that I loved and cared for not only was taken away from me in this way, but also now I even have the entire moment on video so that my grief, my loss can be exacerbated by that much more? Would you too not feel angry? Would you too not want to bring whoever committed this crime to justice? So why then do people's reactions today seem to be dismissed when our reaction is completely natural? Would it make people feel more comfortable if we remained silent, if we bowed our head and hoped and prayed that we were not next? In understanding the factors surrounding the death of Floyd, it would actually be a very unnatural response to do any of these things. The anger and rage you see today, whether you're watching the news, scrolling through social media, watching videos on YouTube, all stem from pain. For many years, minorities have been labeled and stereotyped as criminals, thugs, angry people, lazy, and educated because of our reactions to injustices like this. But if the shoe were on the other foot, would this even be a topic discussed today, I ask? If other groups had to endure a third of the adversities and injustices that the Black community in particular have had to learn to live through and cope through, I truly wonder if we would be having this conversation today. Some food for thought. Now, people can and will twist messages as they choose to. This is not to say that other groups haven't had their own adversities and injustices, but for some reason it has been permissible in the Black community and very few has changed so that these injustices don't continue to happen. And now I know that some of you may be hearing this message. Notice how I said hearing and not listening. And think, here she goes, explaining how rough Black people have it. If that's your attitude, then I simply ask you to reflect within yourself, your values, your belief system, and then ask yourself, why does it annoy or bother you when you hear things like this? Oftentimes, it's the annoyances or triggers that are calling for your attention. Why is it annoying you or making you feel uncomfortable? If these kinds of things were untrue or didn't particularly care about them, then you would have probably very little to no reaction to it. So the fact that you have a reaction to it is a call to attention. I've said time and time again how an individual's grief experience is unique to them. And I will be honest, I can't even fathom the thought of losing someone I love in this manner and being okay. I would not be okay, very far from okay. And I don't know if a lifetime would be enough to be able to learn to live with this kind of pain. I don't know George Floyd, and ever since everything happened with his death, I haven't been able to stop thinking about him. I've actually even had nights where I cried because of the horror that over and over we experience when we watch the video, when we see his face, when we watch how the police kneels on his neck relentlessly without giving two shits. That's traumatic. That's horrific. And the fact that I'm someone that didn't even know him, that wasn't even related, and I'm affected like this, I can't even imagine how his family, how his daughter, how everyone that knew him must be feeling. So I continue. But again, this is a pain that so many people are faced with in today's world. I have to say that this death has felt like the tipping point for so many of us, not just here, but around the world. 2020 has been a challenging year, mentally, emotionally, and physically taxing, where the phrase "tomorrow is not promised" has never resonated more than what it actually does today. As a whole, we have been in a vulnerable place with everything happening related to the pandemic with COVID-19 and each country's response system. To then have something like this, which is not new. It's not the first time either, and it continues to happen again, 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 and again. In light of everything happening, there is the hope that this pain is being fueled into action. Action for change, action for justice, action for equality, action for a tomorrow for people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Ahmaud Arbery, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, Botham Jean, Betty Jones, Michael Brown, and all those whose names didn't make it to the media, but unfortunately made it to this list. A list that no one should have to be a part of or even exist, and yet it does. The protests around the world have placed a magnifying glass on issues that we have been talking about for decades, yet the messages have previously fallen to deaf ears. But the protests are just the beginning, and we must not stop there. Too many times we focus on the immediate expected outcome, which in this case is to bring to justice those responsible for the murder of George Floyd. But in the past, it seems that over time we have retreated and resumed our daily living until it happens again. As you all know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. In order for the change to withstand the test of time, to be seen across the board, it has to be as much as a collective act as it is individual. This is a battle that is going to take a long time, but we can't be deterred simply because it will take time and effort. Unfortunately, as you can see, the systems put in place are not systems that are meant to work for all of us. We read in our history books that slavery ended in 1863. But did it really end, or did it just conceal itself in conspicuous forms? I leave that to you to further explore. In order to see a change that we have all been wanting, we must prepare to do a complete reboot of the political system, of the education system, the financial system, the legal system, the media system, the sports system, the consumer system, and most importantly, the systems we put in place in our homes. Racism is not born, rather it is taught. And of course, we're not perfect, and our families pass down to us beliefs, views, and ideas that can be faulted and distorted and simply not right. Again, this is not to condemn anyone, because your norm may be completely different from my norm. But all I ask is that us as individuals ask ourselves where our belief systems, our thought patterns, behaviors, and perceptions come from. Is this how we truly feel inside, or is this simply something we inherited from our home environment? As parents, you have the power to create love in your child or create hate. I understand that reprogramming yourself can be a challenging task, but it is one that is needed and worth it. There is enough to go around and more. Different isn't bad. Different isn't scary. But yet America in particular continues to try to make everyone fit into these cookie cutter categories. Whatever role you decide to take, I ask you to not give up. No effort is too little. I ask you to all show compassion, understanding, and kindness. I read an article that discussed the hate and criticism that the young lady who recorded the George Floyd incident is currently receiving. Some people have stated that she should have intervened or done something more. But realistically and logically, how does anyone think it would have ended for her as well, intervening as an African-American female? Had it not been for her, perhaps this case wouldn't even have seen the light of day. Also, be kind to those that are seemingly silent. Not everyone is in the mental or emotional condition to react right now, or may be doing so in ways that perhaps they don't reflect on social media. Just because it hasn't been posted on social media doesn't mean it is any less valuable or didn't happen. Focus on the cause, the intention, the purpose, and the overall benefit of this movement. Don't allow this to fade away. Stay persistent, stay consistent, because in a world where we all want all lives to matter, make sure Black lives are included in that too. And I also ask that you please remember to, especially during these times, take care of yourself. This is an emotionally, mentally, and physically challenging time for us, and we have to make sure that we replenish what we give out. So like I said, I wanted to keep this brief. I thank you guys for tuning in. Please do feel free to share your feedback, your comments, and make sure that before you respond, I'm not just saying to my video, but just to anyone right now in social media, make sure you're trying to come from a place of understanding, compassion, and kindness, because I think it's becoming a little too easy for people to reflect hate, reflect, very critical thinking, where sometimes if we just take a step back and think before we type, we may, come off a very different way, and we can still be able to get our points across. So